Now, if you look at the picture of this piece, you'll notice that the bottom rails on the sides have a nice gentle curve added to them on the bottom profile. So what we're going to do is make a template out of 3/4 inch plywood, and I'm going to use a little strip of trim hickory. This is from a kitchen project that we did, but it's perfect to bend for the curve. So I'll show you how that's done now.
I begin by marking the center point of the lower rail using a tape measure. I know my piece is 28 inches long, so I measure in 14 inches from both sides to find the true center. Then I strike a line at the center point. With the lower rail stock flush with the back of my template stock, I mark the locations of the top and the sides as well as the center point. Next, I strike a horizontal line 1 inch up from the center point. This represents the highest point of the curve. I also strike a horizontal line 1/8 of an inch up for each of my sidelines. I then drive in 3 finish nails into the 3 cross point locations I just created. Next, I place the bending strip in front of the 2 side nails, but behind the middle nail. This ensures that the curve I draw will follow the proper path. The curve should peak at 1 inch at the center and terminate at the very end of each side. Keep in mind that the side nail placement depends on the thickness of your bending strip. Mine was 1/8 of an inch thick, so my nails were placed up 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the template. I then cut the template down the size using my lines as a guide. I rough cut the curve on the bandsaw, and I try to keep the blade about 1/16 of an inch away from my line. I like to use a 1/4 inch blade in my 14 inch bandsaw, and that way I can cut complex curves pretty easily. I then use the oscillating spindle sander to get even closer to my line.
Now, if you don't have an oscillating spindle sander, you could always use a regular sander just to get it down even closer to the line. You could use a file or even a pattern maker's rasp would work just fine. But the next step is going to be to smooth and fair this curve. And the easiest way that I know to do that is to use a flexible sanding strip. I like to make mine out of 1/8 inch thick plywood. This is 1/8 inch thick birch. Now when I make these, I like to make them 3 3/4 inches wide by 10 inches long, and that's just because of the size of your standard sheet of sandpaper. I can cut it in half and it wraps perfectly around this piece. Now in order for this to work properly, you're going to need handles. So usually I take some scrap wood, some cutoffs from pieces that we've made earlier, and I will epoxy those. You just use some 5-minute epoxy to the front and to the back. And that actually gives us some really good handles. You might want to round over or sand over the corners so you don't get cut or any splinters, but that works perfectly for handles.
After cutting a sheet of 120 grit sandpaper in half, I tape the half sheet to my flexible strip using regular masking tape. With the template clamped in my bench, I begin sanding. Although the strip is flexible, it's rigid enough that it doesn't follow any of the small valleys, kind of like a hand plane. The result is a nice, smooth, and even curve. Sometimes I find it helpful to mark the entire curved surface with a pencil before sanding. This allows me to identify low spots and is a simple visual indicator for when the job is done. Now I simply transfer the template curve to our actual workpiece. Then I rough cut the curve at the bandsaw, just like with the template. Now instead of sanding to the line, I'm going to use our template and a flush trim router bit to establish a perfect copy of our template curve. To do this, I use double stick tape to attach my workpiece to the template. Take the time to ensure that the template is positioned properly before applying the pressure that activates the tape. Whenever routing without the aid of a fence, it's a good idea to install a safety pin. Starting with the workpiece against the pin, I carefully engage the router bit. Now the bearing on the flush trim bit will ride against the template and trim away the excess material on our workpiece. The paddles I'm using keep my hands safely away from the bit, while still allowing me to control the workpiece. Notice that once the bit contacts the workpiece, it's okay if you lose contact with the safety pin. With all of my parts cut, I begin sanding each piece with my random orbit sander. I start with 120 grit followed by 180 grit. I do one final sanding by hand with the grain using 180 grit. And finally, I break all the edges using a folded piece of 180 grit. Using a chamfering bit in my plunge router, I create a chamfer on the bottom of each of the legs. Now whenever you make a square bottomed leg, it's always a good idea to chamfer the bottom edge in order to prevent unsightly chip out. A little hand sanding softens the edge and gets rid of any burn marks.
Now you can see I have one of the side pre-assemblies here in the clamps and it's drying already. Also notice that I actually pre-finished the parts before I glued them up. In some cases, and this is one of them in particular, I find it a lot easier to do that and it saves me a lot of time, and the finish itself is quite a bit better because I can get into all the nooks and crannies and everything's nice and smooth when it comes together, and any glue squeeze out, I just wipe that little bit away, and you know, the glue sitting on top of the finish, so it's easy enough to clean away. You don't really have to worry too much in this case. The way the joints are constructed, none of my finish or lacquer, none of it actually got into the joint, so all those remained intact, and I used using the domino, I have a loose tenon construction, so all of my tenons are sitting in a bag and have no contact with finish at all. So it makes for really nice, tight, secure joints and a cleaner looking finish. Now the finish I chose to use is a straight off the shelf Minwax oil-based stain, and on top of that I used my pre-catalyzed sealer, and then I sprayed on a pre-catalyzed lacquer on top of that. I would say about four coats on top of the sealer. Gave me a really nice thick finish. It's a semi-gloss finish, or what they refer to as a medium rubbed look, and it turned out fantastic. It's going to be really durable, and I think the customer is going to be real happy with it. And just a quick note about finishes and stains. A lot of times people or companies, smaller companies, they like to experiment with different finishes. It might be easier for them to just grab some pigments or dyes or stains off the shelf, mix things together and make their own custom colors. And I guess I could sort of see a reason for that if you really just want people to be dependent on you and to keep coming back to you because you're the person who made this exact finish. And I think a lot of times people like to keep this mystery around the finishing process. And to me, I think that's stupid. I think you're really better off going to Home Depot. If you can find the color you're looking for on the shelf, why not do it that way? This way the customer can reproduce this color if they need to. I know they're going to come back to me anyway. I'm not concerned that I'm going to lose this job. The construction speaks for itself, so I'm not too worried about the color. I just want to make my life easier, so all I have to do is put a note in my notebook, this customer used this particular Minwax stain, and I know I can always get it, and it's always going to be the same consistency unless they make a major product change. So when you're picking your finishes, it's good to experiment, and it's great to be able to color match. And I've got plenty of pigments and dyes. I could have reproduced this color using the stuff I have on my shelf. But in the long run, it's a lot easier for me and for them if I use something that's commercially available. Now, since I use the domino for all of my joinery, I had the option to actually put more than one tenon per joint. So in fact, that's exactly what I did. I put 2 per joint, which means the glue up is going to take a little bit more time, and I'm not going to have as much time to get the glue distributed on all these pieces. So imagine, you've got these 4 slats into the rails, then the rails go into the legs. If you're using regular yellow glue, there's really no way you're going to get all that done, especially if you have 2 tenons per joint. That's insane. So what I actually did was pre-glued my tenons into the mortises on each piece so that I could just sort of assemble things together and not have to worry about inserting the loose tenons into place. And before I do the final assembly, I'm going to actually prepare, just like I did with the other pieces, and pre-glue these little domino tenons into place. So just put a little glue into each mortise. The great thing about a joint that fits as tight as these joints, you don't really need a whole lot of glue. There's just so much perfect wood surface to wood surface contact, long grain contact, that a little bit of glue is going to go a long way in these cases. So, and you'll see I actually can only get the tenon in so far with finger pressure, and I have to give it a few taps with the hammer. That's a tight fitting joint. Now, I have to say, the domino is a fantastic tool. And since my initial post in a previous podcast about the domino, clearly there's a lot of attention given to a tool like this because it's new, it's doing something that we've been doing for years, but it's a lot faster, and there's a price attached to it that a lot of people are concerned about. All I can say is if it is in your price range, it's an awesome tool, well worth the investment, and it's going to save you a lot of time. If it's not, Clearly there are other ways to get the job done, and we've gone over quite a few of those. A few folks have brought it to my attention some of the systems that I didn't even mention that are even lower cost than either one of these systems, like I think the Lee FMT and the Wood Rat, to name a few. Now, just Google those and you'll find some information on them. Personally, I don't know a whole lot about them because I usually go for the older school methods for the most part. So there are other ways to do it, but I got to tell you, if you do have the funds and you're interested, the Domino is a great way to go.
As you can see, the final glue up required some creative clamping. Just an FYI, I wound up adding more clamps below these to get more even clamping pressure along the joint. In order to attach the tabletop, I'm installing figure 8 fasteners. These great little doodads will hold the table down securely, while still allowing the solid wood top to expand and contract with seasonal changes in humidity. I use a 3/4 inch Forstner bit to drill a flat-bottomed recess for the fastener. Notice how the location of the recess will allow the fastener to swivel back and forth. I simply pre-drill, drive the screw, and we're ready for the next one. In order to attach the base to the tabletop, I place the tabletop upside down on a soft surface. I keep this guy in my shop solely for this purpose. I highly recommend getting one. Actually, that's my buddy Chris from Chicago. Now he's internet famous. I check to make sure that we have the exact same spacing at each corner. Once the base is in position, I drive screws through all of my fasteners and into the tabletop.
Well, what do you think of our arts and crafts table? The color is exactly what the customer wanted and the finish is right on. Now, the proportions are pretty much what we expected too. I guess that's really how it should be. That's the value of using a program like SketchUp to plan your projects. We already knew how the piece would look in 3D space, so there's no surprises when the table is finished. Now, I hope some of you will be inspired to make a table like this for yourself. And remember, don't ever feel that a particular project is beyond your skill level. Challenging ourselves is how we grow as woodworkers. And actually, sometimes the best way to learn is trial by fire, so dive right in and just give it a shot.